artificial intelligence has crossed the threshold from experimentation to enterprise core. Now, according to McKinsey, 78% of companies are now using generative AI in at least one business function. Yet, despite this widespread adoption, over 80% of organizations report no material contribution to earnings from generative AI use. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Diyalani. Many attempts to scale AI beyond pilots fail when they hit the depth hurdles, technical, process, cultural, and data, all caused by legacy systems operating in the background. I came across a recent research, or a report, and it highlighted that this is already playing out in the market. So, to become an AI driven enterprise, CTOs must undo the shackles of legacy, and to do that, they must embrace AI as the orchestrating layer behind legacy application modernization as it alters the economics of modernization. Today, let's welcome Rajsekhar Datta Roy, Chief Delivery Officer, Sonata Software, to discuss how enterprises can scale and drive their AI-led transformation into some measurable business impact. Hi, Raj, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
Glad to know, Raj, and a very warm welcome to our podcast today. And with regards to AI, we have been having endless discussions and conversations discussing its impact, its drawbacks, some risks that come out when deploying widespread AI. But of course, I think this challenge is a very inherent challenge that we are facing since the outcome of AI, that it's very difficult for organizations to scale their pilot projects into something that helps them give measurable impact. And I think we're going to discuss a lot about it today with you, Raj. So, without wasting any further time, let's get started, and let's start by, understanding more about Sonata Software, its specialization, and alongside that, something to know more about you also, Raj, and about your current role today.
So thanks again. Great to be on your podcast and be talking about a topic which is quite intriguing, contemporary, and I think a part of every other conversation, if you like. Obviously, Sonata, as most people would know, has existed for close to 39 years today. So it's been a long journey at for a company which has traversed and seen multiple leaps of technology, right? And that comes to its advantage. Today, we are positioned as a modernization engineering company, and where we help clients modernize their businesses technology to help them stay ahead of the curve in some ways. So I think that's our positioning, and the word modernization and engineering is deliberate for two reasons. And we don't think the time is that you start on greenfield projects and stuff like that. You essentially have to modernize and continuously modernize to stay ahead. And number two is largely we are focused on engineering rather than a lot of managed services and stuff like that. So I think that's where core of Sonata is. As far as my journey goes, I've worked only in one this organization, which is Sonata Software. So I have played all kinds of role one can imagine. Most of my time, obviously, I did a small stint in sales as well, but 95% of my time has been in building competencies, practice, yes, and managing client portfolios in delivery as well as various go-to-markets globally. Particularly, I've been associated with the Microsoft relationship globally for Sonata, and over the years constitutes about close to 60-70% of what Sonata services constitute of. It's been become a significant relationship, and we have some of the highest status that one can think of in as far as the Microsoft relationship goes, including Inner Circle for Dynamics, part of Microsoft AI partner ecosystem, Fabric, and so on and so forth. I think I've also seen the journey of Sonata from practically very early days to becoming $1 billion organizations, and seen these jumps at various points of time. So that is where I am today, and AI is just one more step in the journey as I see it, and a good opportunity ahead of us.
Thank you for that overview, Raj. And we're really glad to know how the company is progressing itself. And of course, your role, where you have been associated with the company since almost like since the initial phase, and how you and your responsibilities intersect with the broader vision of the company. It definitely sets the stage for a deeper dive and the ideas that you're bringing to the table. Now, you spoke about, helping clients, modernize their operations. For years, legacy modernization was viewed as a necessary evil, a very complex, high stakes initiative driven by risk mitigation and technical debt reduction. It was treated as an operational mandate, not a strategic one. However, that perspective no longer applies. AI has fundamentally redefined the purpose and potential of modernization. What was once about updating systems is now about unlocking enterprise intelligence. So the question has completely shifted from can we afford modernization to can we afford not to activate the intelligence in our legacy systems and processes? So I think modernization is no longer a project. It's more of a reinvention of how the enterprise learns, decides, and competes. So, and many organizations, talk about AI transformation, but very few achieve a real business impact. Now, being a chief delivery officer, you were once the CTO at Sonata, Raj. So, considering the perspective from both a CTO and a CDO, what separates experimentation from true modernization at scale?
It's a very pertinent question, and I've been part of few. And modernization is not easy, if you like, on unless it is viewed very strategically. I think that's an important topic, and one should look at it as. And I just stepping back, I think for a moment before I get into the modernization, one has to look at, especially with AI, right? How systems are evolved. And since I've spent as much time, could see that, oh, what is the system of record, right? And is what is the system of record becoming system intelligence? And now it is probably evolving to systems of autonomous action, right? So I think that evolution is very important to understand, right? We tend to view the same transformation in the lens that we have done in the past. Nothing wrong with it, but no longer the same paradigm stands, right? Moment I say it's a system of autonomous action, it means that the work that we were used to doing is going to change, right? So it's to a large extent and I can talk about experimentation essentially says that you're dabbling and you're not serious about it. So I actually take that word very approach. So whenever I've seen large modernization succeed is that it has been thought of as a business transformation, right? The technology transformation has also come out of the need for business transformation. And one of the big needs that I see which is coming is how do you build agility within the enterprise, right? How do you evolve faster, right? How do you respond to changes faster? And that I think determines in many cases the organizations which will be successful in future. Now, if you take that paradigm and you apply AI to this, then you really have to question that how am I going to really assume that how will this should change? And hence, there is a one to look at the business process itself, much like one would have done when you were looking at business process reengineering or ERP implementations in the past, right? And reimagine how the workflow should be, what should the role of individual departments and technology, so on and so forth, is also the technical stack, right? And it has changed so fast, and it needs to be something which is what we call something which can morph itself soon enough, right? So the days of monolithic systems are far gone and came service oriented architecture, and now it has further evolved to agile architectures which can evolve as the business needs goes. So I think in some ways we are saying that one, what's driving that modernization, and it's not certainly that it was a necessary evil, but what business outcomes do you want to really drive? And I think one of the key business outcomes should be agility. And if so, you can approach it from various perspective of looking at business led or a tech led, right? A tech led is a easier on change management. A business led is more on the heavier on change management, and one can be follow the other in some way, but both are essential to be done. And typically these programs ends up as continuous modernization program because as you know, I mean, what we imagined 6 months back, the technology landscape is different. The capabilities that becomes available, especially with AI, has become different, and hence the assumptions that you made may not hold true. So one needs to be ready to continuously modernize, and that's when it delivers business value. right? And I think that the incremental business value that then translate into best use of AI that we have seen.
That's a powerful perspective, Raj, and I think it's really important how you need to draw a clear line between doing AI and becoming an AI-driven organization. And it's important that to understand that true modernization isn't just about deploying models or running pilots. It's about rethinking the very fabric of how an organization operates, starting from the data infrastructures to even their end-term decision making frameworks. And I think I would love to build on that and move ahead in our conversation. So when we talk about pilot projects show that an AI concept can succeed in a controlled setting, but they reveal very little whether it will continue to work when it's exposed to the data, systems, and cost pressures of everyday business. So, moving from a small success to a more dependable, reliable, and affordable service is the true essence of scaling. Now, most organizations will soon run not just one AI systems, but many, each embedded in different parts of the business and each generating its own data. And analysts are already seeing this transition underway. Gartner expects that by 2030, the majority of enterprise software will include multimodal AI that can handle texts, images, speech, and structured data together. So that expansion brings powerful new capabilities, but also a need for structure and discipline. So what does scaling AI really means and looks like inside a large enterprise? And what are certain things that we need to rethink in terms of scaling AI?
No, I think again, interesting question, and I think I'll provide a practitioner's view of what I see and implement for clients. Right? I think there are lots of organization and but many organization who have deployed various forms of AI in experimental phases. Right? Whether it's for HR, it's for finance, or it's for customer service, and or any of the internal operations. Right? The fragility of this happens because of two, three things. Right? The question becomes, okay, I deployed. What did I gain? Right? In terms of business, have we got more business out of it, or have we been able to reduce the cost of operating that business process, what it is? And I think there is a question of what I call efficiency versus effectiveness. What are you really trying to solve in that process? Are you trying to solve an efficiency problem or an effectiveness problem? I think effectiveness is key, right? Without, you can solve efficiency, but if it's not effective, if your customer service is not effective in getting good customer satisfaction, then efficiency doesn't. So I think that's a paradigm one needs to understand, that how effectively you can deploy. And I think there is space for all technologies. Everything doesn't need to be AI. There is deterministic technology is still very relevant. The data that we use, the practices, the human element of that is still very relevant. But there are places and there are steps in the process where AI brings significant capabilities which was not available to us when we imagined this. So I think that's one thing to look at. What is, how do you look effectiveness versus efficiency question? Now, when we ask the question, okay, how can I be more effective? Maybe and efficient, then I think that's where I think it starts getting a little bit more, let's say, I'll not call it complex, but a little bit more serious conversation about, okay, how should I then think of it? So first, I think there are two, three things that one needs to look at once you done. As soon as you put into a serious use, obviously the data sources that you start accessing changes. Right? It can then no longer be the simple some chatbot or an agent that you have built and it works with some simple data. It needs to actually leverage organizational data. And the definition of that data itself has changed. And how effectively you create the data sources to work with your AI workflows is fundamental to being more effective, right? So that's one, whether it's graph DBs, more multimodal architectures, vectors, RAG, whatever various technical implementations which are available on how you want to integrate all this. But the reality is, how do you get that data to work and be available when either the human being or the agent is orchestrating it? That's, I think, the first thing. The second very important thing is, I think, how do you govern all this? And I think the second element is, okay, when you're governed, am I, there is a risk of data privacy? Is there a data getting exposed, which we don't want to, whether intentionally or unintentionally? I think that's a data designed for how do you manage security, how do you manage governance? And a very important element, and we have seen this in early days of cloud also, is how do you manage compute? And once we don't govern it, compute goes out of hand. And as soon as the compute got out of hands, and then ends the business case for efficiency on which it was built on, and then you hold back. Then some CFO or somebody will come back and say, hey, we are spending much more, we are not seeing the results. And that's where. So I think thinking ahead, a responsible first framework of deployment of AI is the first step of creating a basic foundation for using an effective AI, as we call it. Now, on top of that, I think you can always say that, okay, which processes have I picked up and what steps of the processes I'm deliberately enabling by AI to create the value that I want to. I think those two elements with the underlying governance architecture about the 2, 3 layers that I spoke of is probably what makes it to see ROIs. And places where you don't see ROI, when some of these elements are not thought of upfront, and hence it causes gaps in expectation as well as gaps in returns versus spends, if you like.
Well, that's a very powerful way to look at it because it shifts the narrative from AI becoming a core capability, which is kind of embedded into the DNA of the enterprise. And I think, with what you explained, it's clear that scaling AI isn't a linear journey, it's pretty much layered. It starts with experimenting, then it moves into integrating those models across systems and teams and decision points. And, it eventually challenges organizations to rethink their core workflows altogether. And I think that's where, we can highlight that AI is no longer sitting on the sidelines. Great. So, moving ahead, when we talk about deploying AI projects and investing in them, you just mentioned in your earlier response that sometimes you go over budget, and then the chief financial officer comes into the picture and asking for the justifications of AI investments. So in overall, I think the CTOs and CIOs play a very key role in evaluating the use cases for AI, often presented by the tech team itself or other business managers across the organizations. With generative AI projected to add as much as $4.4 trillion in value annually, the sky feels like the limit to the transformative power of AI. But again, with that, it also comes along with the responsibility of ensuring that when anybody is investing, in AI, anybody would want to see some measurable impact. So, CTOs are increasingly being asked to justify their AI investments. How should leaders rethink ROI when the benefits often extend beyond just immediate cost savings?
Again, a great question. And I think the whole premise of one shouldn't look at AI as a cost saving tool, right? And I'm saying that in the past, we have seen that, okay, can it make it faster? Can it make it quicker? Can it make it more, let's say, effective in dealing with a situation, right? Is a very important question versus how much are you going to save. If you're going to save, there are very ways to save. And the demand on compute versus cost of compute versus if you arbitrage with the cost of human workforce, right? That's a narrow view to take, right? One needs to see what kind of business outcomes now you can take with AI, right? Now, and it might as well be that the average cost of delivering per unit of that work packet is lower. But the greater is to look at what is the value that we are going to deliver to our stakeholder. It can be a customer, it can be a partner, it could be a supplier. Are you getting a better experience? Are you creating a better value for your stakeholders? And if that's the case, then at what cost points, right? And when that happens, the cost angle doesn't look at as big a hurdle, right? Because there is always ways to manage, optimize cost hurdles, if you like, right? Cost hurdles, if you like. But we do have need to plan for compute and the architecture for AI very thoughtfully so that you don't get into a situation where it goes significantly out of hand. But otherwise, it's much like your any other IT initiative. There are times when the cost can be a little higher, it could be a little lower, but one can always pull that back. But that always happens when somebody can see that there's a business value still being generated, right? The problem comes when you don't see business value at the end of the journey and yet you keep on spending and more than what you expected. So I think the whole thing is to look at, I think, transformation. And we define this journey in 4 ways, right? We call it how you, everybody starts with discover, then you come with design, and then you come with some kind of define which is for your internal process, and then you go to differentiation, right? We call it 4D if you like. So one should see where you are in the journey, right? If you are going to redefine your internal process, you should say what the transformation value I'm going to. If you're going to differentiate your capability in the market with your customer, then that's a separate, what's the value you are creating for your customer or your consumer segment, if you like, right? As long as that gets addressed, the cost becomes a, I'll not say not important, it's very important, but something that one can be optimized, managed as we go through the journey.
Yes, definitely, Raj. And I think what you really mentioned, that AI is no longer just like a cost optimization engine. It's more about building a long-term strategic advantage. And AI investments do often unlock intangible returns, whether it's faster decision making or improved customer experience. So these are the outcomes that don't always show up immediately on a balance sheet. But they, of course, play an important role in fundamentally reshaping the competitiveness of the organization, because I think in many ways AI is not just a tool, it's kind of becoming a core infrastructure for how enterprises can turn itself into modern operations and evolve accordingly. Great. Moving ahead, Raj, in earlier of your responses, you did mention about having proper governance and risk management. Now, the promise of AI-driven efficiency and automation, it's hard to ignore, but rushing ahead without proper safeguards can backfire. And we have already seen examples that it has. So, of course, poorly governed AI systems are exposed to a lot of risks. And but on the flip side, if we exercise excessive caution, can be just as well damaging. Because when governance becomes a bottleneck, innovation stalls, teams hesitate, projects get stuck in approval cycles, and competitors pull ahead. So as AI is becoming more embedded in critical business operations, how do you think that organizations can balance the speed of innovation alongside ensuring governance and risk management?
And I think again, I would emphasize. I think we have come up with this whatever framework, how to look at the journey, right? And identify where you are. And I think first is, I think you discover, right? In terms of, that's the experimentation you're saying. As soon as you have done with the discovery, you probably have experienced it, you understand what it is, and you have seen the pilots, you are more, let's say, aware of all the things that needs to be potentially managed, right? Which was big. So I think the first thing is discover. Second is to actually look at how to kind of define the guardrails, right? Which is the design of the organization, role access, role based access, even sustainability, if you like, if you are big on ESG and stuff. Remember, there's a whole sustainability cost to all this infrastructure. So, and then look at it. I think that's a fundamental, because without that guardrails, you often don't go wrong because you picked up the wrong process or the wrong way to intervene. You often go wrong because you encounter issues which are not related to the process at hand, but you encounter issues which were essentially related to unavailability of data, security, cost of compute, inaccuracies, or misuse, right? So those things are very critical, because that becomes an early setback. And as with any new technology, when you have an early setback, it makes that journey to convince in the next run that much more difficult, right? So one needs to, as soon as you're done with experimentation, the first step is to define this responsible first guardrails for your organization before you really embark. Now, having done that, the threat and the technology around has evolved, right? I mean, who would have spoken of MCP 1.5, 2 years back, right? MCP as a service was not available. So there are new architectures which are evolving that continuously needs to be managed, observed, and reinforced while we get the business processes as well as various applications to be enabled with AI. But the underlying governance framework also has to evolve, but you have to set it up first and then evolve it as you go along.
Right, definitely, Raj. And I think when we talk about governance, it has to evolve in parallel with innovation. It's not about slowing things down, but about building the right guardrails from the start so teams can move fast and responsibly. And I also think this brings a cultural shift into focus because companies and enterprises need to move from reactive risk management to a more proactive and design first approach where ethics and transparency are embedded into the AI lifecycle itself. Well, I think, AI driven modernization isn't about replacing old systems with new ones. It's about re architecting how enterprises think, decide, and operate. And when, intelligence becomes interesting to every workflow or even a decision, enterprises move beyond incremental improvement towards continuous reinvention. Well, thank you so much, Raj, for your time and effort to be on our podcast today and helping us understand that as the lines blur between process, data, and experience, the enterprise leading this shift share a common trait. They treat modernization as a strategic foundation for innovation and not just a tech project. And I think the way forward begins with reframing modernization as an ongoing strategic initiative rather than a one-time project. Thank you so much, Raj, for your insights today. It was lovely chatting with you.
Likewise, very nice to be on your podcast and exchange views. Very interesting set of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. So, this is for listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion around modernization and how it's playing a key role along with the integration of AI. And it's important that today's deployment becomes tomorrow's legacy system. And just as operations continuously evolve, your tech stacks and integration frameworks also must do the same. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and you can view all our previous episodes on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.